We made it into Music Radar, boys. We're eating good tonight. Right, so there was this article, a bit of non-alcoholic cider, in Music Radar that a couple of my buddies, shout out John and Chris, someone else as well. I think 3 people sent me this. I can't remember who the third is, so obviously I'm sorry. Came up in my Google, you know, like Discover thing on Android. Anyway, so Music Radar, one of the chaps, I'm going to find out his name. That'd probably be a polite thing to do, wouldn't it? Rob Lang. Anyway, the article was called YouTuber Buys the Cheapest Square Strat He Can Find, Proves Age-Old Truth About Tone, but also something else. Where you invest your money in the signal chain matters, I guess. This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Tone is in the amp, the guitar, the cable guitar strings pick, the pedals, the pedal power supply, but how much of it? Nowhere near as much as your hands and the way your hours of experience animates them. So, yeah, the article kind of saying buying gear will only get you so far, and also something about what you spend your money on. So it's a really complimentary article, which, Rob, thank you if you're watching this one as well. But I've seen this, and I've said this before, and sort of this idea that gear doesn't matter. What do people really mean by that? And why do we say it? That's kind of what I wanted to explore in this video a little bit. So if you wanted the tones that I was using in the intro there, like almost always, I was using probably a Strat into Helix Native. I haven't actually filmed it yet, but that's probably what I'm going to do because it feels right to me to do that. But yeah, I did this video with the Squire Debut, and people say that gear doesn't matter. Now, do I sound like me when I play the Squire Debut? Unfortunately, yes. Do I also sound like me when I play like the Collings, like an £8,000 guitar? Also, yes. Why do people say this stuff like the gear doesn't matter? I think part of it is because as someone who's also, you know, just watches YouTube stuff and reads stuff about gear, we are kind of bombarded by gear. So I think one of the things that we're talking about in this is kind of just something different to talk about. Do you know what I mean? As much as anything else, whereas most of my videos will be looking at a specific piece of gear, this became something that was kind of interesting to talk about for me, where it's like, well, sometimes, you know, I'm selling a bunch of gear that for some reason I thought was worth talking about. or, you know, how much money that I've spent on gear over the time. Again, I thought that was kind of something that was interesting to talk about, and maybe other people did too. And I think it's also interesting to kind of share these ideas with other people, because I think basically, for me personally, if someone has bought a piece of gear specifically on my recommendation or because I liked it, that feels strange to me. The idea of when I started doing YouTube and all this sort of stuff was more that I just like to play guitar and playing guitar in the bedroom. Things that have developed from there are kind of just happy accidents in a way. But yeah, so for me, there's like an element of guilt there. And I've said this before, like I wouldn't want someone to go and just buy a K-line guitar because I happen to play one and then be disappointed by it. People do sound like them when they play more expensive guitars as well, right? Like the gear is not the whole answer. Another part of it, I think, is there's a little bit of an element of guilt and also some aspects of being a bit jaded by this stuff. So like I have more gear than I use regularly. And if I'm honest with you, there is a part of my brain, and I think 5 Watt World Keith is similar, where the idea of having less gear is also a nice idea. I live in a 3-bedroom house with 8 dogs and 2 other women. One of them is 17 months old and the other one is my wife. It's nothing weird going on. But so this is a bedroom. There's a bedroom next to it that we sleep in, and then there's a tiny like little box room, which is where Elodie sleeps at the moment. And it's kind of like, you see there's this stuff here, there's stuff behind the camera over there, and it kind of gets a bit like, well, because I'm demoing bits of gear, you know, people like Tony's lent me a blue guitar amp, an Ibanez JS 1200, I've got a Sire guitar over the back there that they sent, I've got my own guitars that I bought over here, and some acoustics that never get played over there. Space is a factor, and I think cluttered kind of space, cluttered mind, these kind of things go a little bit hand in hand for me. And the notion that you could have sort of maybe 3 guitars and really pare things down to a nice kind of less space consuming thing, I think is quite a nice idea to me. And also then there's the element of like, if you're always kind of shilling gear, as often I am, this kind of guilt thing where you think like, well, I don't want people to think that they need any of this gear, or that this gear is going to necessarily change their lives, so that they are like tempted to go and make purchases which are things that they wouldn't ordinarily buy. Now, I don't think people are necessarily that naive that they're doing that. I'm assuming that you recognize that when a paid promotion is a paid promotion, it's a bit of advertising. Sometimes advertising is effective, other times it's not. I guess you know the difference. But does the gear matter as much as maybe we think about? Maybe not. But again, Keith did a video on this, I think, based on something that I had seen said on a forum, the Fretboard forum. I think someone had kind of put up on there that it's kind of more fun to talk about gear in some ways than other stuff, right? Than to actually play the guitar sometimes. Not for me, like I prefer to be playing the guitar, but talking about gear is maybe what gets people clicking on these videos more than if I just do lessons all the time, or if I just play jazz all the time. I could do that to an audience of maybe 4, 5 people. The gear kind of is the hook, and whether that's kind of talking positively about a bunch of gear, asking questions, comparing gear, trying to make decisions, I think that is an important thing about what drives kind of traffic on the internet in general. In terms of it being an age-old truth about tone, like it's what you bring to it, I think that is certainly partly true. I guess you start to find your tone, hopefully, the more you play, and certainly the more gear that I've acquired over the years, the more that I've found that I'm basically, and people do tell me this in the comments, trying to, I guess, I massage most things to sound like a thing that I'm trying to sound like, I guess. Even if I'm trying to demo a Vox type thing or a Dumble type thing, in the end, the things that I do with those tones are probably getting me a close result. and especially when I end up then playing the same tired licks through them all anyway. So I think there is an element of this. So why do people say that the gear doesn't matter too much? I think it is to help, or try to remind ourselves as much as anything else, that, and take the ego out of it a bit. Like, you are obviously going to sound pretty much like you and me, and I like to think I'm versatile, but I'm probably not as versatile as I'd like to think. I don't want people thinking that any one piece of gear is going to get them exactly the same results that I get. Although Helix Native is a really consistent thing. Like, if you're saying I sound the same on everything, then Helix Native is like the constant often, or more often than not. So that might be a way to get consistent tones, that if you're liking what you hear from me. But yeah, I'd like to know your thoughts on that as well, I guess. But it's nice to be kind of talked about kindly. But I do think as well, it is important to make the distinction that there is a difference in feel and tone between, like, the cheapest guitar I could buy, like 129, and the thing that I play all the time, like my K-line, which has Monty's pickups in it that they did for me. This is a K-line that I bought from a forum, the Fretboard forum again. I think I paid like £1,600 for it, roughly, used. There is a feel of quality to more expensive stuff, and maybe some cheaper guitars, you know, if they spend more time on them, you can get closer. But I do think there is something, like Jake was talking about this with his Jet Telly, where it's like you can kind of be, it almost feels like you're tricked for a while by a really cheap guitar. Like this Squier debut, part of the novelty is that it's like £129 guitar, and that's kind of a bit of a party trick, right? Where you think, well, that's a really cheap guitar, but once that kind of feeling of it being cheap wears off, what are you left with? Probably a guitar that is like quite impressive for the money, but doesn't necessarily inspire you as much. I don't know if you've ever found that, where there's this guitar out there, or this pedal or whatever, where you thought, well, that's a bargain. Is it anything more than a bargain? Like, do you keep coming back to it and playing it, or does it then just become like an extra bit of guitar gear in your room, which you bought because it was cheaper, but then when you really think about it, does it inspire you? I'd be interested to know if that's a thing for you guys as well, where like the bargain aspect of it kind of took over, and then once that wears off, you've actually got a guitar in your hands that might not play as good. I don't know. Yeah, just a random thought that I had. But yeah, I think there's lots of stuff about that. Anyway, let's go play some guitar. It's Sunday. Hope you're having a good one, and cheers to Music Radar. Cheers, Rob.